Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alexander van der Putten. I'm the Chairman of Corporate Governance and Stewardship at the AIFC. Let me, first of all, start with a few administrative aspects. As you probably have noticed, on the back of your delegate card, there is a QR code in case you want to follow. I know it's towards the end of the day, of course, but if you want to follow how this day is unfolding. I also need to say a few things about our sponsors that have made this day possible. That's Visa, Freedom Holding Corp, and ITS companies. By the way, Visa is giving free coffees over there. Actually, I have one already right here. Fire safety. We're here in London Hall. In case there is a fire, we don't expect any drills. So if there is an alarm, that basically means it's real. And then in order to vacate the building, the best way is actually to go immediately here to the right and then out here, but alternatively can also go in the other direction. We're now in one of the buildings, but you can also go in between the buildings in order to vacate the room. So we're going to talk today about disruptive risk and resilience. We, on the panel, including Ian and Ulf, who are introduced in a minute, we're all governance professionals. And in 2004, I wrote a paper on disruptive risks and resilience, and that actually landed me a job with the World Economic Forum. I then became responsible for scenarios, global risks, and also competitiveness. But also it accelerated my career in governance myself. And we're not trying to spread fear here. But if you think about the role of a director, the role of a director is to link strategy with risk and outcomes. When I was the chairman of the BCPD until the end of last year, we always had strategy and risk on the agenda of the board. And I'm looking at my company secretary here who's sitting in the room, and he's not nodding like this, he's nodding like that. So, and Nurganum is my witness here. Let me now introduce our panelists. First of all, we have Ishak Burney, who I'll later will refer to as Easy. He's Managing Director and Chief Legal Officer at the Astana Financial Services Authority, which is our own regulator. Now, Easy is, I believe, the only member of our panel who has previously been a company secretary. And as you probably know, a company secretary is the conscience of any board. It's also typically the only full-time governance professional active within a company. And I see on the screen Ulf nodding positively. And I know that Ulf has great respect for company secretaries. If you have a great company secretary, you will do well as a board. And especially as a chair when you have to organize the agenda. On my far left is my dear good friend, Akshu Campbell-Holt. She has now dual roles. First of all, head of member relationship with the World Alliance of International Financial Centers, and also VP with Bitfinet Securities, which is a more recent role. Previously, she was with AIX, Astana International Exchange, AFSA, our regulator, but also with the AIFC Authority. And I have known Akshu for a long time. Then online, we have two other very good friends, Ian McKay. Ian is an independent director with Kazakhstan Temir Zholi, which is our national railway here in Kazakhstan. Ian is also a chartered director. Then we have Ulf Wokurka. Ulf is also an independent director with Kazakhstan Temir Zholi, but also an independent director with KHOC. Ulf and I have served on the boards of the National Investment Corporation in Almaty before, and recently also on the AIFC Authority Board. So let me get started immediately and welcome all our guests as well. So the first question, and of course, all the panelists know the question already, and what I will do, I will ask the question not to all the panelists, but typically 2 to 3 questions for each of the panelists, And then also, if time permits, I would like to invite the audience to ask questions as well. First, we're going to discuss the relationship between a dynamic board composed of directors who have a broad range of experience and perspectives to the sustainable long-term success of the company. So how does diversity, board diversity, contribute to the sustainable long-term success? I will start with Akshu, then Izzy, and then Ulf. Akshu, please.
Thank you, Alexander. I think keeping in mind the way you introduced with the disruptive risks, I think we are in the midst of fourth industrial revolution, and we discussed this a lot, Alexander, and you and I discussed this a lot, and the implications, and I think this is one of the largest implications in possibly, arguably, our lifetime in terms of disruptive, well, I would say disruption. It could be a risk, but also a great deal of opportunity. And I think it's critical for boards to be in a position where they can anticipate the changes. I think looking at the long view of industrial revolutions, yes, there are significant implications with every industrial revolution, but I think a differentiating factor in this particular one is the pace of change. And I want to refer to some of the group of researchers from McKinsey Global Institute who have estimated this disruption in our societies from AI alone, as a result of AI, artificial intelligence alone, is happening 10 times faster and at a scale 300 times the magnitude of our previous industrial revolution. So there are huge opportunities as well as risks if you are do not have resilient systems that can take advantage of that. And what is needed is, well, when the pace of change is happening at this rate, it's very difficult to frame a proper response or a conclusive response. So what I believe is needed is continued dialogue to assess the societal implications, and cross-sectoral collaboration is critical. So dynamism and diversity touching on these cross-sectors, including governments, researchers, industry, as well as innovators. I mean, I'd say in addition to tech innovators, even social innovators, because of the implications that it has on our societies, and I include environment as well in this. So yeah, great deal of opportunities. And I want to say, in terms of opportunity and the recent role that I started, I think Bitfinex Securities is a great example on how, well, for those of you who do not know, it's a digital asset trading, issuance, and trading platform, and really looking at empowering investors, providing capabilities for investors for self-custody, real-time settlement, 24/7, 365 days in a year, while maintaining the regulatory oversight. Now, this has potential to revolutionize capital markets as we know it. So this is just one example on how technological capabilities can be leveraged. And in terms of long-term sustainable or sustainable long-term success of a company, I think looking ahead, incorporating social costs and social gains, or maximizing social gains, will be critical within company activities. In the way we're seeing mindsets across the board changing, investor mindsets, as well as intergenerational transition within our workforce and across the board. So really incorporating social gains and social costs, critical, in my view, in terms of board dynamism and perspectives.
Thank you, Akshu, and I'm very happy you brought up the velocity of change. I'm currently writing a book on leadership in the era of the fourth industrial revolution, and indeed, the change that we're seeing is dramatically faster, and the effect is significantly bigger as well. But that doesn't mean that disruptive risks needs to not create opportunities. This is something that Akshu referred to as well. When I started my career, that was in Singapore, I started working together with Pierre Wack. Have you heard of Pierre Wack? He's the grandfather of scenarios at Shell, and he had just retired, and he was talking to me about gray rhinos. And I said, Pierre, what are you talking about? Gray rhinos, what do you mean? And he said, they're shades of gray. And if you can spot the weak signals early, you can turn that into an opportunity. But if you don't spot them, and others do, you don't want to face an angry rhino. So there's both opportunity and risk. And this is the responsibility, in essence, of boards, and linking that to strategy as well. Now, in a fast-paced environment, I would argue we have to change as country, as businesses, and as individuals, at least as fast as the environment in which we operate. If we don't, then the negative consequences will be there. So we have to change at least as fast. Let me now go to my neighbor here, Izzy. Izzy, please.
Thank you, Alexander. So just as we were walking up onto the stage today, Alexander said, well, Izzy, you're sitting in the center of the panel. Can you moderate it? So if I can be naughty and actually pose a question to Alexander before I give my intervention, Akshu and yourself both mentioned the term 4IR, or Fourth Industrial Revolution. Can we ask you to briefly tell us what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is? Because I think it's a novel concept, very relevant, and perhaps worth enunciating a little bit on that.
Thank you for that. In 2006, still at the World Economic Forum, I oversaw the development of scenarios which is called the digital ecosystem, as a precursor to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Many people believe that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is the digital age. That is an incomplete assessment of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The way that 10 years later, in 2016, Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, defines it is the following. It's the fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds. And going forward, it will become increasingly challenging to define what it means to be human. Are we ready for that? So it is the fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological world. Yes, we talk a lot about AI, and this morning there was a panel on immersive and augmented technology. And 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity at IE University, where I'm a professor, to meet with Sam Altman, the current CEO of OpenAI. Indeed, AI is going to play an important role. But what we very often don't see is the whole aspect about the evolution and the fusion of not only the physical and the digital world, but also the biological world. And that will bring also some ethical questions to the fore. And the question is, are we willing and able to deal with some of these ethical questions at the level of the boardroom? I hope that was not too long. Easy.
No, certainly. I mean, given that you've written a book on it, there was a risk in this question that, it may be for the rest of the panel, but obviously that didn't work. So, okay, so let's take what Alexander just said, physical, biological, and digital. So basically, if we start talking about governance, and in the context of boards being able to address these challenges for the coming future, what do you need in the boards? You need a diverse mindset, right? I mean, we go back to the legal thing. He was talking about, that if you don't do this, there'll be negative consequences. What are the negative consequences? Negative consequences are that regulators like us actually come around, slap you around, give you fines, ban people, and done plenty of that in my life, right? And when I look back on all the cases that we've had to deal with over the years, like, in Australia, in Middle East, and then, here in Kazakhstan, I mean, by and large, it's either a function of greed and serious malfeasance, in which case, different story, right? I mean, But on the other side, you have this context of the board not being really aware or not being able to see that black swan, white elephant, like, peripheral, rhino, whatever, like, you want to call that animal, but not being able to see what the challenges were coming before them, right? So let's look at these challenges. Physical, so, the good old corporate governance matters, which we often use to in terms of operationally managing an organization. And then there is, digital, but that was the next challenge, probably need some broader mindset to increase. All of us are lawyers, we have serious, traditional corporate governance backgrounds. We probably need to bring someone in from the IT field on our board to actually add a bit of diversity to our thought process, right? And then what? Now, Alexander's even complicated it even more. So he's saying we also need to think about how the biological is going to interact with these two existing factors as well. So that requires a completely new set of minds in terms of being able to deal with this complexity of a multidimensional atmosphere of corporate governance. So now step back a little bit, it's towards the end of the day. All of us need we've all had long days. We should all probably do a little bit of stretching. And if I can just ask in this room, we all live in Kazakhstan. I can talk on, with Alexander, I also teach the Chartered Governance Qualifying Program in Kazakhstan. So we can talk about global scenarios, global cases, all through the day, right? But I want to talk about Kazakhstan because we're here, right? Can I ask you guys, can you raise your hand if you think that boards are diverse in Kazakhstan? Boards in Kazakhstan. Do you think that boards are diverse?
And if I may add, what Easy is really referring to is diversity of thought, right? So we tend to think about gender diversity, ethnic diversity, but really thought diversity, being able to bring different perspectives into the boardroom.
One brave hand, perhaps, no. I see a few niets, we saw one board, one hand, right? That's our perception of governance within Kazakhstan. I didn't say this was the perception of the crowd, right? So when we talk about diversity, we really need to think about, diversity from multiple contexts, right? There is the ethnic diversity, very important. International context, even more important, right? You need people from multi-gender backgrounds, multi-ethnic backgrounds, because it brings diversity of thought process into the whole equation, because you're doing that. Fair enough, we live in Kazakhstan, we know what our ability is, but there's also domestic diversity as well. People from different regions, people from different areas, which bring, that sort of diversity. Then there is the internationalism versus the localism, how to balance that if your business has an international, aspect in terms of global expansion measures, or perhaps you conduct businesses in multiple geographies. Then there is professional diversity, accountant, lawyer, IT guy, cybersecurity expert, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in further. People from finance backgrounds. Now, in other countries, there's mandated provisions in terms of you need to have at least one board member with this particular background. But what are we really trying to do over there? We're just trying to bring a diverse set of mindset in the board, which acts as the unified mind of the organization, which is the legal definition, unfortunately, of how we look at what the mind of the organization is, right? And then there is neurodiversity as well, and thought process diversity. So you start thinking about, well, this person is a bit introverted, that person is a bit extroverted, this person is a risk taker, those sort of things. So in board assessments globally, people also measure that sort of thing. So with what's coming in future, the way that corporate governance is changing, diversity is very, very important, and we need to think about all these factors in constituting what constitutes the idle board. Thank you.
I think everything has been said, so we can adjourn. No, sorry. Ulf, please. The word is yours. We can't hear.
Financial days?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Excellent. Good afternoon to everybody. Interesting questions that are being discussed at this panel, and unfortunately, Easy did not see when I raised both my hands and saying, yes, I know diverse boards in Kazakhstan. For instance, the one Ian and I are serving at in Kazakhstan, Temir, there we have 3 nationalities, at least 5 different ethnic groups, unfortunately only 1 gender, but experience and background-wise, I think we are also very diverse. We are also facing challenging tasks in a quickly changing environment. And when preparing for this panel session, I, of course, studied with great interest the papers that Alexander kindly sent us in advance. And I came already up with the idea that these nice tables with 3 or 4 governance styles, with 3 events, such as black swans, gray rhinos, and white elephants. This is good to standardize our way of thinking and to work out some quick reaction to changing environments. But as always, there are 50 plus shades of gray and 50 plus different rhinos, and some of them are more peaceful and some of them are more aggressive, and they all deserve a different reply. So I think we should not discuss so much if the current assessment of, for instance, the impact of artificial intelligence, whether this is 10 times faster than expected or 300 times more or less of greater or smaller impact on our business environment. I think we should work out simple mechanisms how the board can ensure that the company reacts adequately and in a timely manner. And there, I guess, it is good to have very practical, proven methods of decision-making. Weekly, gathering a wide range of views, of proposals, vetting them, and coming up with a consensus proposal that is being supported by the majority of the board. In this way, I think we can survive and be successful also in this fast-changing environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulf. I'm going to now go to Ian with the second question. So this is about externalities, and most of these externalities are currently not priced into markets. An example is, for example, the cost of global climate change. When the Stern report was released in 2005, I believe, the cost of global climate change was estimated to be $500 billion US. At the end of last year, the cost was 17 trillion. So, in other words, it was growing at a rate of 26% compounded annual growth rate, 26%. So 5 times faster than the global economy in a good year. That's just an example on global climate change, the cost of global climate change. Now, markets will eventually internalize this cost. So how do you deal with these externalities when developing strategy? Ian, please.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and hello to everyone in Kazakhstan. It's a bit early in the morning for us rather than late in your day, but I share your tiredness. Let me just use one segue from your first question to the second one, Alexander, and that is perhaps to underline the importance of the structures that we have been talking about being delivered through real people through that biological factor of the real actual people who sit on boards, the real actual people who make decisions. I speak to you from a country where the efforts of our two most recent prime ministers, in Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, have had the effect of damaging much of the economy, both in the financial sector and in our manufacturing sector. And indeed, we still are toiling from the effects of the ideologically driven Brexit vote of some years ago. So we shouldn't rule out the effect that individual people can have in leadership positions. And I think that is where we come to your second question. On our board, I think there's a good example of the way in which world events can affect you both for good and bad. All of us, for example, if we look at the COVID crisis, and I agree with Alexander's assessment of COVID, that this is a black swan event. While we may have looked for pandemics, we were not looking for this particular way in which it would affect us. The bad side of the opportunity of world events has been seen in the fraud in my own country, where individuals promised our health service PPE and other vital equipment for dealing with the pandemic and made many millions of dollars of profit selling poor goods and taking advantage of a world health situation. That's the bad side of how world events can be set upon. Closer to home, I can share with you, I think, a situation which KTJ had to deal with, which is where KTJ has the ownership and the part ownership of the ports on the Caspian Sea. And through our subsidiaries, we also have some ships which are trading in that area. Now, for some years, because of the strategy of the company, where we were emphasizing more the rail transit routes, the importance of those ports was less and less within the overall strategy of the company. Had we been sitting in a board meeting, we would have said, yes, we have assets there, but to be honest, they're not that much use for us. We don't really see their importance. And then along comes last year and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and suddenly the development of an alternative route that takes the freight from China into Europe, which is by far the most important trading route, as it has been for thousands of years on the Silk Road. The importance of those ports on the Caspian Sea suddenly became immense. So all of a sudden, an asset that you have been sitting with in your portfolio, not really thinking about very much, suddenly becomes very, very important. And I think it is the ability of a board to recognize that and to then change its operation in order to take account of that and make best use of that asset, which is vital in this way of thinking. The question really is, how does a board prepare for that? You don't prepare for pandemics. You can hope that you prepare. They will always come up and bite you. And it's very difficult to prepare for war and for situations of that kind, 9/11 situations. What we have done as a board, however, and it is ironic that before the Russian invasion, our board had already carried out an on-site visit to the Caspian ports in order to assess what they were like, what the possibilities were there, and so on. At our last board visit, we went in the other direction and went over to Horgos and to the dry ports between Kazakhstan and China in order to look at what is happening there. And importantly, Chair, to get an idea of what is your actual situation on the ground, so that instead of just dealing in numbers in the boardroom, you have a much better idea of what the real capability of your company is. And I think it's that information gathering, it's that proactive seeking out of the reality behind the numbers, which allows boards to be able to deal better with changes in the global situation and so on. I have to say to you, and I'm sure Ulf would agree, every board meeting now for us, given the pivotal position of KTG in Central Asia and the events of within that part of the world, every board meeting for me now is like a seminar in geopolitics. Our CEO fills us in on what has been happening with him and with the company during the period between board meetings. And sometimes I have to sit there and feel that I am back in university and learning once again about international relations because of the situation we're in. But that is the vital aspect. Good information on the ground, understanding, and then moving on from there to analyze and to make best use of the assets you have. I think that's where, whatever one's structures that you have put in place, and it's very important to have protective structures in place, it comes back to people, and it comes back to an attitude among people that will be open and ready for change. This is, I think, very much what Akshu was saying. We have to have an attitude which says, I am ready for change, and I will embrace change and make the best that we can of it.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ian. On the same question, I would like to turn to Akshu. Are you ready, Akshu? Yeah, put your microphone a little bit closer than before. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Always good at feedback, Alexander. Thank you. Yeah, on dealing with externalities, I mean, Ian mentioned COVID and the impact that it has had, and you referred to, Alexander, the global climate change. And I think one thing that stands out in such disruption or these types of global implications that these types of incidents have is the damages are disproportional at different parts of the world. And in my view, I think regulatory interventions and incentives are critical, especially, let's stick with, I think, global climate change for a second now. If we look at the whole energy mapping or even the CO2 emissions mapping, the largest or the most vulnerable are those that are the least CO2 emitters. So they are some of the world's poorest countries in the world, are the least polluters. So I think a collective action is needed in general, like globally, and of course we have different bodies working together, but I think especially with the fossil fuel industry, looking at the unfair advantage over the clean energy sector is huge. And Alexander, if you recall the chapter that we co-authored, we've covered a few years ago, we've covered the subsidies, both indirect and direct subsidies towards fossil fuel industry is, I think back in 2007, this was more than $5 trillion US. And this was at the time about more than 6% of global GDP. Now that puts them gives them a very unfair advantage. And I think regulatory interventions and incentives are critical to create a level playing field. Now we have great examples of countries like Norway, and we're doing an amazing job. And I think the financial sector has a critical role in this whole climate change initiative. I want to talk about, especially with the World Alliance of International Financial Centers, what we're doing. We initiated last year. We initiated a new project which looks at global supply chain finance, looking at, speaking of collective action and what's required in terms of enhancing transparency in our global supply chain, and also creating resilient supply chains in light of the current geopolitics that we're seeing, and also the lingering effects of COVID. So this project will look at, will assess the impact of current supply chain finance within our members and looking at global supply chain finance, and also provide with some clear policy recommendations on how some of those regulatory and policy interventions can really enhance and make these supply chains resilient, therefore take a collective action towards some of these, the implications that such externalities can have.
Gracias, or Rahmat, sorry. I'm a little bit wary of time, so I'm going to go to the next question. And I will start with Easy, then Ulf, and then the final word is for Ian. So this has to do with cybercrime. So the cost of cybercrime globally stood at $7 trillion last year. If it would be a country, an economy, it would be the third biggest economy in the world, cybercrime. So, and it's expected to grow to more than 10 trillion per year by 2025. The sectors most affected are utilities, healthcare, and the energy sector in general. I'm currently completing the cybersecurity board oversight with the National Association of Corporate Directors, which is the sister organization of the Institute of Directors in the UK, and they argue that we should not treat cybercrime as an IT-only issue, that all of you, myself included, are the weakest link in the entire process. So let me ask a question. You all have a smartphone, correct? Who has sensitive data on their smartphone? Who connects to a public Wi-Fi with their smartphone? All right, I do the same, but not anymore. We're all guilty as charged. Sorry about that. We should all resign from our respective board. No, I didn't say that. Here's the question. Does your board approach cybersecurity as an IT issue only, or as an enterprise-wide risk management issue? I think I mentioned, I will start with Ian first, is that correct? Or was I confused already?
I think you mentioned to start with Easy.
With Easy,
Yeah.
I'm
happy for you to go first.
Okay, do you want me to go first?
All right, Ian goes first, Easy second, and Ulf, the closing comments on this topic. Go ahead, please.
I think I've jumped the queue, but I'm quite happy to do that. Our general attitude is the latter. I think you're correct. This is not an IT issue. It is an issue about risk and indeed about opportunity right across the whole of the company. I think I'm sure that you did this on purpose, Alexander, but you can see, I'm sure everyone who's online and there in the hall are seeing that risk is really the unsaid thing which is underlying all of these questions. And risk and opportunity, of course, are the yin and the yang of progress. And I think in this particular matter of cybersecurity, as you develop your IT system generally, and as you digitalize the arrangements that you are making within the company, as KTJ is doing just now, so you must address both the yin and the yang of what that will mean. It will open you up. The more you digitalize, the more you will be opened up to the dangers of cyber crime and to the problems that that brings. Equally, you will be in a better position to combat corruption and crime because you have introduced digital systems. They are impossible to separate. They offer both that opportunity and that risk. And I think this again comes back to having in place a systematic and thought through approach to risk and to the way in which we develop our companies and the way in which we develop different aspects of our companies. The attitude on cybercrime, I think, is one which is very illustrative of the dilemma that most companies, if not all companies, will face in this next period. And the more that you are dependent on the advantages of digitalization, the more of a risk you will have of cybercrime being an aspect. I would just add one last thing. We should remember that the cybercrime does not come from AI. It doesn't come from the machines themselves. It comes from people and crooks who are manipulating the IT in order to carry out the crime. In the end, it is a people issue also. It is about the people who have access to it. As you just said, Alexander, if we didn't ourselves walk around and put sensitive data on our phones, there would be no opportunity of anyone getting to that data. It's our problem as individuals as much as the systems within our companies, I think.
Superb, Ian, and I'm very happy you brought up both the yin and the yang. So it's not just about the cost and the risk, but it's also about the opportunity. And they actually go hand in hand. And having a systematic approach, as Ian mentioned, is, I think, very critical. So I said I was going to give Ulf the closing comments. So I first go to Izzy. Izzy, please.
In the interest of time, I'll do this quickly. I think we need to approach this problem, in my perspective, or at least I'll try to approach this in two different perspectives. First, I'd just like to remind everyone that, not too long ago, there was a few days where, we didn't have internet access in Kazakhstan. Can you remember what effect that had on just your day-to-day life? I remember going to a grocery store and not being sure how to pay for what I had purchased here. Yeah. So just think of the significance of that on the individual, and then think of that in the context of organizations, banks, having a consequence where you have complete denial of service. Basically what your business is, it's somewhere out there in the ether, you can't access it. You're locked out from it, right? Now, let's approach it from the point of view, well, what I do, I regulator, what is my perspective? What should I do to actually fix this, make people be aware of this, take some positive measures, right? How many people have seen a cybersecurity, so it's a 7 trillion problem coming up in a few years, right? I did a panel earlier in the day, we were talking about asset management, right? Promoting asset management, like, seeing the size of that. This is a $7 trillion problem coming up. How many people know of a cybersecurity module in conduct of business rules of regulators? Not many. So when you actually start measuring, 7 trillion is one way to look at this problem, and you add I started looking at business plans. Some of the regulators are good enough, they release business plans on what they're doing, right? And at least there's some green shoots over there, because you can see that, people are realizing the importance of this. You look at, for example, I use DFSI as an example and ADGM as an example. DFSI releases its business plans. You start reading it, start talks about we'll do this on the prudential measures, we'll do this in terms of bank liquidity, we'll do this in terms of that. And then you come to a place where they start talking about cybersecurity, and they start talking about cybersecurity, they keep talking about it for 2 or 3 pages in a significant document. So at least as regulators, we've realized that the threat of cybersecurity, particularly for our industries, where increasingly we're going into digital assets, we're going into digitization of existing banking services, we're thinking about tokenized commodities, we're thinking about tokenized securities, how we used to. And you need to think of the significant consequences and how we need to codify this into our rules. So it's good that you have good corporate governance, good that you have prudential measures. What about cybersecurity? I think we should be very, very specific on this. And also I think that boards should constitute at least one person. My personal view, don't think that is going to make it to the AFSA rules straight away, but my personal view is that we should have specific requirements about cybersecurity membership of the board. So this issue becomes important and remains important, because as far as I'm concerned, the next pandemic type event, last one was a bit biological, I think the next one is cybersecurity. I mean, I'm quite convinced of that. And I think we should actually all act as a regulatory community to actually take protective measures against that.
Thank you, Izzy. The panel will close in 1 minute. Ulf, not only comments on this, but closing comments for the entire panel, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for this honor. As always, I appreciate your forthcoming attitude. I would like to say only one sentence on the cybercrime issue that you raised. Luckily, in both boards where I'm serving, KIGOG and KTZ, both companies benefit from a nationwide firewall set up by a central governmental authority. And all companies within the Samruk Kazyna group of companies are benefiting from this firewall. However, coming back to your initial question, whether it is an IT issue or a strategic issue for the company, I think still it is both, because any company behind such a government-sponsored firewall needs to stay alert, to be able to react to the black swan, which may also occur in the area of IT security. So therefore, I very much appreciate the proposal of Izzy that we should probably make sure that in the diversity of our board members, there are also IT specialists, people who are abreast with the latest developments of technology in order to ensure sustainable long-term business success of our companies. And I think this is a good closing remark. Thank you.
It is indeed, Ulf. Ulf, you probably remember when we were on the board of the National Investment Corporation, and you and I were both also on the audit committee. We visited the offices at the NIC, and we asked where the servers were based. We also asked where the backups were, and the backups were just next to the server. Now, the National Investment Corporation was managing up to $2 billion of assets of the country, sovereign assets. And you probably remember that before Almaty was called Almaty, it used to be called Verni. And the city was leveled by an earthquake. So Ulf and I, we asked, what if there's an earthquake? Or what if there's a fire? Are you going to be able to be up and running very quickly? So we then left, unfortunately, the board, but we suggested that there would be a fault tolerance system, a system that would allow you, if something happens, something that you cannot identify neither in time nor in space, that it would allow the National Investment Corporation to be up and running again very quickly. Now, these days, you can do that in the cloud. We recommended to do that based on a leased line and have a full backup system, including the computing systems, in another location in Kazakhstan that would allow actually to resume operations very quickly. So even if a black swan strikes, you can still have contingency planning in place in order to mitigate the risk and remain up and running as well. To my audience, I would like to ask you a hand of applause to our panel. I learned a lot today, and please look at disruptive risks both from the yin and the yang side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you both, Ian and Ulf. Take care.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Take care. Bye-bye.